in this district. And then last year, you saw how Virginia flipped blue on the Senate and the House side. So all we need is a strong campaign with a strong message, with a dedicated group of volunteers, and we're going to flip this district blue. It's going to knock people's socks off, and we can have a Democrat in the White House with a strong Democratic Congress. So I'll stop there. That was a lot. That was a mouthful. Happy to take any and all questions. And I will look at some of the questions on here already.
We actually, Qasim, we actually had some folks submit prior. And
great,
because they did that, I want to give them the preference first. And so David Thames, I believe you are on here, and you submitted a question. And so I'm going to unmute you and allow you to ask your question to Qasim. Go ahead, David.
Well, hi. I don't remember the exact question I wrote, but I think it was something along. Oh, could you do that, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
David, you asked, how do you use framing techniques in your communication to voters? And could you provide a specific example of how you frame that conversation?
Sure. So I think this is an extraordinarily important element where if I could be critical of the Democratic Party, I think we need to do a better job of framing. I think we need to do a better job of messaging. I had a young woman reach out to me just today and say, I now begin to understand why the phrase "all lives matter" in response to Black Lives Matter is so contrary to common sense and contrary to progress. And it was because of some commentary I had given, helping her understand why when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we're not saying only Black Lives Matter, but we're talking about how in this particular situation, when Black lives are being discounted and marginalized, it is necessary to affirm this reality. So I have, to a fault, this belief that people at their core are good, and people at their core want to create a sense of peace and security. And so I always give the benefit of the doubt until somebody of their own accord chooses to disengage. And so I'll give you a really good example of that. Wes, you mentioned the story about that got the CBS attention. A gentleman who was in our district sent me a really nasty Islamophobic tweet telling me to leave the country, that I'm unfit for office, that Muslims shouldn't be allowed to be in office. And my response to him was going to be something that I call collateral education. We all know what collateral damage is, right? It's this really sanitized term given to when we're trying to kill a terrorist and we kill innocent people instead. We call it collateral education to make it sound nice. Well, I despise that term because I don't think we should ever justify killing civilians. But I coined a term called collateral education. And that is that when somebody sends me something hurtful or harmful or nasty, I'm going to try to educate that person publicly. But my audience is who I'm really after. I may not get through to that person, but there are many people watching who will benefit from it. And so I was going to engage with this person in that manner. But then I looked at his bio and I learned that this person has about $25,000 in medical debt. And so I donated like 50, 60 bucks to his campaign. And then I tweeted out his GoFundMe saying, this person sent me a really hurtful and Islamophobic tweet. I don't know who he is, but he's suffering, he's hurt. Let's pitch in if you can, and let's help him out. And I've got a modest social media following, and people pitched in, and we were able to pay off every single penny that was his medical debt. And we verified it, that it was legitimate, it wasn't a scam, but the key thing is that people opened their hearts. And that not only won his heart, but I've received literally dozens of messages from conservatives saying that we thought the Democrats would be celebratory when they saw us suffering. We never realized that we were misinformed because we hadn't actually engaged with Democrats before. And so that's the point that I try to think about, that whenever you're in a given situation, you have to frame your response with the belief, with the assumption that you might be the only point of contact that that person may ever have. And that if you respond in kind, then all you're risking doing is validating what their preconceived notions are about you. If I had responded to him and said something nasty or something aggressive or angry towards him, it would have validated his false belief that Muslims are angry or Muslims are anti-American. But by showing my actions and my words to be one of compassion, Mark Twain said it best, that there's nothing quite as annoying as having to argue with a good example, because you can't overcome it. And so that was the point that I was trying to make. And I've used this method repeatedly. Now, a word of caution, I've also received death threats, and it doesn't always work. But without marginalizing or putting yourself at risk, I believe there's an opportunity for us to frame our response so that it doesn't necessarily target just that one person you're addressing, but it becomes an opportunity for everyone watching to also learn.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And our next question, Christy from Virginia, I think I found you, so I'm going to unmute you. Do you remember your question?
Actually, I think I do. So this is actually referencing back to the house party that you attended with us on Saturday, and you answered a really great question about high-speed internet and how it should be something that everyone has, because in today's world, it affects education, jobs, and just quality of life. But you were in a house party of all Democrats and all people who are pretty progressive. You are your CD is red. I mean, it's turning blue, but it's not completely. How are you doing something that's so obviously progressive and sell it to a red audience?
Great question. And so part of the way I frame my answers is to recognize the audience that I'm speaking to. And so when I have been campaigning, and obviously it hasn't been in person, I've made it a priority to call every single elected official in the 1st District. Every town mayor, vice mayor, council person, school board member, board of supervisors, delegates, senator, you name it. And all in all, several hundred people, I think close to 300 people or more, I've called every single person and had one-on-one conversations with them. And wouldn't you believe that after having spoken to well over 100 conservatives and Christy pitching them this exact same idea, not a single one said it was a bad idea. Every single one said, yes, this actually makes a lot of sense. And I think it's for a number of reasons why they agree it makes a lot of sense. One, they are just as tired as anyone about waiting and waiting and waiting for broadband. They know that this is a necessity. It's not a luxury. It was a luxury in 1995. But if we're going to ask students to live up to 21st century standards, we need to give them 21st century tools. And then the logic supports it as well. Without broadband in rural areas, you can't have a small business enterprise. You simply can't. You can't have any kind of business enterprise. You can't have consistent education because children don't have access. You are putting a stranglehold on rural hospitals. And I think one of the pressure points that I've learned that I'm tapping into in a compassionate manner is in a lot of rural areas, children grow up, they go away to college to a bigger city, and then they don't come back. And so you have this drain of young people leaving rural areas, and that's painful for parents and for grandparents. And so when I talk to my conservative constituents and I tell them that, look, this is not any kind of liberal agenda or a progressive agenda, this is just a very common sense, basic fundamental human rights agenda. You don't have to change your religious values by any stretch of the imagination to agree that children shouldn't have to sit at McDonald's to do their homework, that a small business who wants to sell widgets shouldn't have to move to the big city and pay exorbitant rent. They should be able to do so from their own home. And when children graduate college, they should have an incentive to bring that knowledge back to the rural part of the country, to the rural parts of America. Let's take small farmers, for example. Small farmers should be able to compete with big farms right now. They can't right now because they don't have access to this data and technology. So Christy, I'm really happy to report to you that over the last 3 months, in my literally hundreds of conversations, I haven't seen a single objection. On the contrary, I've had conservatives say that it's a disgrace that Rob Whitman hasn't pushed this through yet, and that he's been gaslighting us on the solution, when right now, by relying on corporations to do the right thing, all we're doing is kicking the can down the road. Corporations will only ever do one thing, whatever is going to make them money. Putting broadband into rural areas is not going to make them money. So we can have all the plans and the bureaucracies in the world to incentivize them. Until it benefits their shareholders, they really don't care. And I'm tired of waiting for corporations. It's time we have a government policy that supports local communities directly, rather than having the gatekeepers of corporations decide what's good and what's bad for our working families.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry. A special guest just called and will be joining us in about 10 minutes. So, AKA Dr. Lakoff.
Oh, great. Great.
I think our next question here is from Tracy. I was busy, so I think I found you. I'm going to unmute you. And if you don't remember your question, let me know and I can ask it for you.
Yeah, that would be helpful. I'm from Whitman, Mass, and I submitted my question, but.
Yeah, Qasim, Tracy asked, what is the biggest challenge you have encountered in your campaign to date?
You know, yesterday I spent the day in a local nearby county, King George County. Spent about 4 hours with my team. We were at a local food bank, handing out food to folks who are struggling and suffering. And I think for me, the most difficult part of this campaign is trying to use limited resources to help an unlimited number of people. And knowing that it's not a lack of food or a lack of money that our country suffers from, it's a lack of compassion. It's difficult for me because, you know, my job as a human rights lawyer is to look at where someone is struggling, where someone's rights are being deprived, and finding a way to rectify that injustice. And so at a time when we can't have physical correspondence, what I'm trying to do is recruit people to our team and advance what we've launched called the Compassion Through Action Initiative. And the basic philosophy behind the Compassion Through Action Initiative that we've launched is that compassion itself is a meaningless word if we don't put action behind it. You know, for anyone who's studied, you know, scripture, you know, James chapter 2 verses 10 through 14 talks about faith without works is dead. The Torah and the Quran have similar teachings. In fact, all great scriptures have a very similar concept of how having any kind of faith or worship without actually helping your neighbor who's starving is meaningless. And so what we're struggling with, and the big ask I have of each of you, is help us advance this element of compassion by helping us serve our community. And that's where volunteering for our campaign is going to be so crucial. We don't have the millions of corporate dollars, the unlimited resources. We just don't have access to that, and we don't want that. We believe that when the Constitution says "we the people," it has to mean something. It can't just be lip service that we say because it sounds nice, and then we take money from, you know, lobbyists and corporations and do their bidding instead. So you know, to narrow all of it down, I firmly believe that at the end of the day, whether we win or lose this election is going to come down to how well we organize people on this principle of having compassion for humanity. If we can be successful in that, if we can rally hundreds, if not thousands of people on this basic principle to advance this aspect of compassion, to get people involved, to make people give a damn, then not only is it impossible that we lose, but we're going to win with such a profound unifying force that will send a message throughout this Commonwealth, throughout this country, that a people-powered campaign dedicated to these values of compassion can be successful. But that all comes back to what this struggle is right now, of building that bridge, building that coalition of people. So those who have bandwidth, we would love to have you aboard.
Great answer. And we're biased, but we loved building bridges in your answer. I think our next question is from Colleen, and I believe I found you. So Colleen M, I'm going to unmute you. And if you don't remember your question, let me know and I can ask it for you.
I think I remember the sentiment, but I would prefer perhaps that you read it out.
No worries.
Thank you.
Colleen asked, what role can Democrats across the country play to coordinate a single messaging framework and strategy that advances the progressive agenda and values?
Well, I think that is a question that needs to be more readily clarified by like the DNC or by Joe Biden. And he's obviously built a strong coalition of Mayor Pete, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren around them. I firmly believe that that we need to be recognized as a party of working families, as a party of the middle class. That's really what it has to come down to. And the data backs this up. One of the things that I talk to conservatives about is when we talk about tax policy, America was strongest. Our middle class was nearly 2/3 of our nation under Republican tax policy when we had a marginal tax rate of 70% or higher. It was a Reaganomics trickle-down mythology that has decimated our middle class to be about 40% of the country right now. And now we have 43 million people living below the poverty line. That's even before this pandemic. And we have become kind of reactive to the Republican narrative who've convinced people that they are fighting for working families, they're fighting for the little guy. And they've done quite a remarkable job that a billionaire who dodged the draft 5 times, who hasn't had worked an honest day in his life, is somehow connected to the working class, whereas someone like Joe Biden, who comes from a blue collar family, or Mayor Pete, who comes from a middle income family, or Bernie Sanders, who comes from an actual lower income family, is somehow out of touch. So I think we need to reevaluate and reconnect with that element of the working class. And I'll also say, I think with liberals, and this might, I want to be careful how it comes out because I don't want to offend anybody, but I think sometimes we need to give people more time to do better. And what I mean by that isn't that we delay justice, that we delay passing the Equality Act, or we delay passing the Violence Against Women's Act. I mean, on an individual level, we have to recognize that people do better when they know better. And like the guy who sent me the Islamophobic tweet, if I just responded and said, well, how could you not know who I am? What kind of a person says this? It's going to revalidate their perspectives. And so that's why I feel like, picking every fight with Trump is not going to really solve the issue. It's going to be, how do we strike to the core of what we're doing for working class America right here, right now? I think if we can get the message out there that we are the party of working Americans, we are the party of blue collar Americans, we are the party that cares about our military, that cares about our veterans, and leave everything else to the GOP. Let them worry about everything else. But if we focus on this core issue, that we genuinely care about people on an intimate, personal level, I think that's the key to victory. That's how past great presidents won. That's how past great parties and supermajorities happen. I think that's what we got to go to, because that strikes at the core of the class divide that's existing right
now. Yeah, and as you were talking, similar sentiments, and Jimmy posted in the chat how Dr. Lakoff talks about how private enterprise and private life so much depend on public resources and the government, and it's all about the people. And yeah, so that, I think that was a solid answer. And I think we got like one more question that was submitted, and then that kind of hits that 30-minute time mark because I want to honor your time. So Kaz, I believe you are here in the chat, and I'll unmute you. And if you don't remember your question, I can ask it for you as well.
I remember it, Wes, but if you want to read it, that way it's more succinct.
Sounds good. So Kaz mentions, brought up the how you responded to the racist tweets, Islamophobic tweets, and then going on to say that during Kaz's campaign experience, I know Kaz working with Pete Buttigieg in Colorado, just talking about how it gave everyone a chance and the experience was very profound. And so as a candidate, how can you speak to balancing, expanding your base and your support, and also balancing it with low risk, high reward campaigning?
So I think that I don't know if I buy into the idea of low risk, high reward campaigning, because I think we need to be bold. We need to be clear. We need to be clear about our convictions. And anytime you're stepping out into the public light, there's a risk. And if we're managing our actions based on what we perceive to be low risk, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. Um, I firmly believe in things like a living wage. I firmly believe that healthcare is a human right. I firmly believe in these values. And the only thing we need to win, I believe, is to be able to get the message out to enough people in a clear enough manner. And so when we talk about expanding our voter base, it goes back to what I mentioned a moment ago, and I saw somebody in the comments said, Bill Clinton won because he felt your pain. I think that is really the block and tackle that we need to come down to. Right now, the way we're expanding our voter base is two ways. One, we're leading with compassion. This mentioned this compassion through action initiative. And we're not using this to hand out campaign literature or give little buttons or caps or saying, hey, remember to vote for Qasim. In fact, we're avoiding that altogether. We're simply offering support. We've provided groceries and tax services and unemployment benefit services, given PPE supplies to hundreds and hundreds of people. And when people ask who we are, we'll say, yeah, this is the Rashid for VA campaign. And people have said, well, I'm not going to vote for him. We'll say, good, no problem. Vote for who you think is right, but you're suffering and we're here to provide that support. So that's the first way. And then the second way is we're not discounting anyone. There are traditional models that say that younger people don't really vote, you can't rely on them. Or Latinos don't really vote, you can't rely on them. And we're saying that's all gobbledygook. That's nonsense. People will vote when they're cared about. And if you care about people, you have to show up for people. And so that's why we're focused on reaching out to these individuals on a genuine, direct manner. And I've made the commitment to my team that if you find one person that wants to have a conversation, put it on my calendar, I will call them and I'll have that conversation. People will call our campaign line and I'll pick up every now and then, and they'll be shocked that the candidate picked up. And what I tell these folks is don't be shocked. That I'm running for the job of being a public servant. I need to pick up. I need to be available. If I'm not willing to do that now, then I sure as heck won't be doing that when I'm in office. But if I'm willing to do that now, hopefully I can gain your trust so that I will be able to do that in office. So my advice to you, and I think Mayor Pete even said this beautifully, that if we compromise with the Republicans, they're going to call us socialist. If we do what we think is right, they're going to call us socialist. So let's just do what we know is right and move forward, and we're going to win more hearts and minds that way. And that's the focus that we have. We're leading with compassion. We're leading with our values, doing what we know is right based on evidence, based on things like science, which God help us, if we were based on science right now, we wouldn't be in this pandemic mess right now. And the response really has been overwhelming. We're getting incredible support from not just conservatives, but elected conservatives in our district who say, we're tired of the hatred and the fear mongering. We feel like we've been duped, and we're grateful that you're willing to keep the door open for us. So it's exciting for us, it's heartwarming for us. And then honestly, the highlights of my day are interacting with folks like yourselves who share that compassion and that conviction, and I see the smiling faces, and it really makes up for the nastiness that I get. So thank you. God bless all of you. Really grateful for all the compassion. I'm going to share my contact information, and I'm going to try to respond to some of the amazing comments before I go. I hope that's okay. But I'll be sensitive of your time as well, and I'll stop here until I'm instructed otherwise.
Awesome. I'm going to unmute Andy. I'm on the phone with Dr. Lecoq to get him on here. Qasim, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and appreciate you for taking the act of hope to run it. And so, Andy, I'm unmuting you and allowing you to take over.
Great. Great. I got to catch the football. Okay. So we're going to move now into the book club part of it. This is a little challenging. I'm not going to lead you on here. Usually we have about 20 people, which is a nice little discussion group. Today we have 94. So in order to keep on track, I'm going to lead the conversation a little bit. We also have some submitted questions and discussion points. And we're just going to go through mostly part 1 and part 2 of the book. I know it's this book is amazing, and like I said, I'm so glad that so many more people are getting exposed to it, because there's so much in there. And as you probably noticed, those first 2 parts, even though it's 49, 50 pages, it is packed full of information and practical information, and it is so good. So what we wanted to start with was just a quick discussion and thoughts. Oh, go ahead.
All right, guys, I think we're gonna try it this way. I have Dr. Lakoff on the phone, and so I'm gonna
there we go.
be on speaker mode. So he's just gonna give a brief introduction into the book, and we hope that the audio works that well for it. So Dr. Lakoff, welcome. Thank you so much for choosing to stop in, and I'm gonna give the floor to you.
Hi, yes, this is George Lakoff, and the whole idea behind Don't Think of an Elephant has to do with what's called framing. The idea is that in general, framing is the way that you cognitively get people to see the issues that you're concerned with from your perspective. And that requires understanding how you use language in order to do that. And that's what the book is about. I mean, how to do that. It's, the whole book is about that, with lots and lots of examples and stuff. So, but basically, if you want to understand how to use language in order to get people to see what your concerns are, how you think about it, how you view the situation, that's how to do it. The book tells you.
We truly appreciate you joining us. And I'll admit, I just read part 1 and 2, and now I can't wait to read the rest of the book to get into specifics. I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to share with our group.
Something very, very quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a reason for the title of the book, the Don't Think of an Elephant, because you can get people to think about what you want them to think about by negation. It's something that Trump uses all the time. If you attack him, that's fine, because what you're doing is getting him as the center of attention.
Mm.
And if you attack him on some subject, you're getting him as the center of attention, allowing him to frame it his way. So it doesn't matter if you are, in favor of him or against him, he wins.
Mm. Yes.
So say don't think of an elephant, you think of an elephant. And that's the point of the title.
Yes.
And that's it.
Well, thank you so much, and I truly appreciate you reaching out. And thank you so much for your work to help ensure that progressives can kind of own how we communicate and start winning those discussions with the people.
Sure, and I hope the book is easy to read and not expensive or anything like that. Enjoy the book, and actually it's fun, as well as enlightening. And I hope you really like it. Take care.
Yes, thank you so much. You have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, I hope everyone could hear that well. we had been in contact. I hadn't heard anything, and I literally had a random number and I answered it. And I'm so glad I did, so you all could hear from George. And so, yeah, so I'm gonna take it back to Andy, because I don't even know where you left off. So I'm gonna allow you to kick it back off again.
Well, I was just gonna talk a little bit about the two big frames, like the overarching frames that he talks about in the very beginning of the book. And that's how conservatives have built their worldview and their framing around the strict father model, where, and it's, it comes from religion often, and, and where progressives and liberals are more of a nurturant parent, taking care of your children, helping your children, whereas the strict father is more like they must obey, and that's how you must obey, and that's how you get ahead. So if anyone has any examples or can think of anything to sort of demonstrate this, it doesn't have to be political either. A lot of times conservative people, they just have a whole different way of looking at the world. And that's something that we need to consider when we're starting to try to talk to them about our values. Because oftentimes one of the questions submitted, I think this is a good place to put it actually, is, where did it go? Oh, it's also from Colleen, actually. Colleen, if you're still there, your question, did you want to, the one you had for more the general, do you remember what it was?
You can read that one as well. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. I will. It's, what are the implications when conservatives and progressives both would identify with the same value, such as fairness or freedom, but perceive what that value means and how it's operationalized very differently? And that's your question. And if anyone has any thoughts on that, just remembering that conservatives look at the world like a strict father model, and liberals and progressives look at the world as a nurturing parent. Can anyone maybe think about it? Yeah, comment in chat. We will unmute and we can talk about it. And you can answer. And we'll try to keep it just a couple minutes, because we want to make sure that we move the discussion along. And usually the discussion is not so guided, it's more freeform, but because there are so many people, we're going to try and keep it guided. So, when you see a value, how do you think a strict father worldview would approach it differently than a nurturing parent worldview? So fairness. Go ahead. Christy? I see, let's see.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah, you said when they talk about family values, dominance of the male.
I think that, yes, I think that talking about the father figure, I live in, I guess I live it, because in northwestern Virginia, all the people who are in the government and in higher places, so these are not uneducated people, but they believe in family values that were spread in the late 80s into the 90s, about the dominance of men. And you can actually see in the homeschooling tracks, the men are prepared to go out in the world and to dominate and rule. And the girls are taught home ec, because they're expected to follow and obey. And there's always someone who leads, and it's always a male. And it's an actual real life way they live. And I think that's how they see the world as well. Otherwise, how else would they justify educating their entire community that way? Because that's pretty much what Patrick Henry College does, where I live, is to train people to think like that.
I see, let's see. Garden Bling Queen. I don't know who that is. I don't know what your actual name is. But do you want to talk a little bit about what you said about your own father and your experience? Oh, go ahead. Oh, Wes, can you unmute, please? There you go.
Sorry, everybody. That's my business little story name. And I had an experience. My father was very conservative, and at the time he was visiting me, and I was caring for my husband who had just nearly been killed and had a traumatic brain injury. But my father thought it was okay for my brother to cheat on his wife because she had just had a baby and she was very overweight. My brother was a personal trainer, and he believed that it was imperative that my sister-in-law lose the weight immediately because it was some kind of detriment to my brother's career and as an example. And so I found that unusual as he sat in my kitchen saying how very bad it was that my sister-in-law was fat in his opinion from having a baby, but expected, that my behavior was, proper, and I needed to give up my whole life to care for my husband, which I was doing, and that was fine, but very different values for the daughter and the family versus the son.
Okay, so let's flip it now to, we've been talking about the conservative way of looking things, but what about the progressive way of looking at things and how we, obviously, the past half hour with Qasim, we're talking about compassion and care for people that are, different from us or the same, or the same as us too. I mean, compassion and care for everyone. And I think that's probably where we often experience a lot of friction with our conservative brothers and sisters, because we think that taking care of people is an ideal, right? And for them, I think somebody said up in chat, sorry, it goes fast, that it's all about effort and how much effort people put in. Whereas, who said that? I'm sorry, I'm looking. Yeah. So it's all about effort and how much effort you put in. And if you try really hard, and it goes into that prosperity gospel that you hear about, or that you're a good person if you make it, if you succeed, you're a good person. Whereas in our worldview, everyone deserves compassion, not just the people that make it. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to get him to shut up, my dog. I apologize. And he is a very big dog.
Should we go to the next question?
Yeah. Okay, so the next one is, sorry, I got to switch back to that window. It's from Ro Lewis. Is Ro on here still?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, there you are, Ro.
I don't remember my question.
That's okay, I'll read it, it's fine. How important is it to avoid using Republican language in progressive circles? Ro is from Medford, Oregon, so listening to KPFA, which is where you first heard Dr. Lakoff, the host said fake news and Obamagate, and all the progressive listening are supposed to know that your radio station is authentic, is real news, and Obama did nothing illegal. But does it still reinforce our negative frames to hear it? And does anyone have any? I mean, I know what I'd say, but this is for you guys. So. Oh, there's Ralph. Louisa? Louisa 4?
Yes.
There you go. Do you have something to add? Go ahead.
Who, me?
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
yes.
You can hear me now. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Yes, I think it's very important to avoid using conservative language, whatever situation you find yourself in, whether you're with conservatives or progressives. I think that that's because when you even speak or think those frames, those conservative frames, they do get triggered in your brain, and you cannot, by force of will, prevent that from taking over and hijacking certain neural pathways in your brain. I have an example for you that connects to your dog, actually. I really enjoy dog training. I also have labs, and they can also be loud. And I try to do this with compassion and in a kind manner. I notice that when I'm around other people who correct their dogs using harsh words like or something like that, that even though I'm trying very hard not to correct my dog and to tell him what I want him to do, I will find myself almost irresistibly drawn to telling him no the next time he does a behavior I don't like. I watch this frame trigger in my brain. It happens without my thinking about it, without my wanting it to happen. So that's a tiny little example that's not political, but from that I can see that it's very important that we lead with progressive language, that we speak our values first and clearly without trying to negate conservative values. Thank you.
No problem. Jimmy W?
Yeah, we got him on mute.
Okay. Jimmy W, go ahead.
Hi. I was just putting some stuff in the comments about the truth sandwich. I don't know if everybody here is familiar with that concept.
Go ahead.
I'll talk about it as best as I can, but if you were, the truth sandwich is when you surround a piece of information that you believe to be false with true information, essentially. So the first, for example, let's use the example of Trump talking about injecting bleach into your body. That's even easier. That's a softball. But you know, if I were to say, can you believe this guy said you could inject bleach in your body to cure coronavirus? I'm literally repeating his message, and then we're just joking about that. That's just literally me almost being as bad as him. So if I said, you know, just so everybody knows, bleach is a deadly poison that is only meant to be used on surfaces, and ingested can, you know, either make you incredibly sick or kill you. Now, yesterday, the president falsely stated by making a dangerous comment that you could actually ingest bleach into your body, which would be very, very, which is obviously medically inaccurate. And then go back and say, now we all know that bleach has been around a long time and it's only used on floors and this and that. And the only way to prevent a virus is from really, killing you or something, is to have a vaccine or effective medication. So this way I'm talking about all this other stuff, but I'm still not ignoring what he said. So I have activated all sorts of scientific frames. I've activated all sorts of frames of protection, and then I am not ignoring what he said, but I'm also making sure that right away I say that what he said is false, or what he said is wrong or dangerous. So once I actually get to his words, you are not just activating a frame of his without any qualifications, and then I go back and I finish it up. So you get the primacy and the last word with your frame.
Awesome. Okay, so we still have a couple questions. One of them is Myron Andes on here. He submitted a question, and it's something that maybe we can talk about a little bit. He's unmuted? Okay, go for it, Myron, if you remember your question.
Sure, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I am a Bernie Sanders supporter, but his slogan drives me a bit nuts, starting off with "not me, us." It's a negative frame, and he's campaigning for something, and the first thing he says is "not me." So my question is, wouldn't it be better if it was something like, it's about all of us, not just me? So the positive was first.
I mean, I agree. But does anyone else have any thoughts about that? I mean, that's a good example, I think, of, you know, tinkering with framing, and maybe how important slogans are, and how to make your slogan kind of draw on. It's something that Dr. Lakoff says in his book, is you can't just come up with a slogan and expect it to work right away. It has to draw on frames that have been like ground into our psyches, you know, like not me, us. It does start with the negative, but it also doesn't really address what Bernie is actually about, I think. And, you know, how you word it does matter, like Chris in the chat just said. And then, you know, if Bernie or whoever, you're coming up with your slogan, you have to think back to what is our progressive frame of reference, and what value and what message do you want to hammer home. And I think that's something that, a lot of people, a lot of candidates really need to work on. It's not just Bernie. So yeah.
We have Chris unmuted. Andy, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, go ahead.
It's Nessa. Chris is over there.
Oh, hi, Nessa.
So this is something that I deal with on a daily basis. I'm a chat nerd. I've been a chat nerd for 20 years. I hang on a chat program with almost 3 million people on it. And how I start my days is going into a Trumpy room, and then going into the next one, and then going into the next. And the truth sandwich is probably, and making it personal. You know, because I go in, I sit and I listen, I absorb, I hear what they're going through, and but I listen to these, and the wording and how you talk to them matters in every way. I mean, if you validate even like the smallest negativity, if you even give it any kind of platform, I mean, they just run with it. So I need to get this book.
Yes, you do.
I feel like I read it. Is this a revised?
Yes, it was updated in, I think, 2014.
Okay, I read this book when Obama was
yes,
running, but
yes.
I'm just listening and taking it all in, and what everybody is saying, and I'm just like, oh, I do that every day. I do that every day. I do that every day. Everything that you guys have talked about in this book, it works. But you we really gotta be careful in how we're, because you're gonna amplify that negativity in like the drop of a hat, and all it takes is one sentence to either lose or get a new voter. And I have over 500 future former Republicans are now for Democrats, because they do what they do all day, every day. And it's hard and it's stressful, you guys, but it's well worth it. But at the end of the day, I mean, your words matter. And and you have to make it personal.
Yes. That's awesome, Nessa. You're awesome. You've been awesome through the whole campaign cycle. So we are running out of time. We want to respect people's time. We had an hour scheduled. I know there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to that got submitted, but the ones that were submitted that we didn't get to actually do segue into the next section of the book, which is talking about how to frame specific issues, things like immigration, taxation, global warming, everything like that. So I do want to there is one last question, and that's from David James again. And David, I don't know if you remember or not, but it is, I'm going to use it to segue into our next session, which is actually going to be on June 1st, because next week is Memorial Day, and we wanted to give people the holiday. So is David still here? Okay, go ahead, David, if you remember your question.
Still here, but you should ask the question.
Okay. The question was, what are some practical guidelines for applying framing techniques when discussing politics with conservative and libertarian leaning friends? So, like I said, the next section of the book actually talks about this. So we will get into that in detail next time, but I want to leave you with one little example from the book, and it is something that you can do very simply, and you can start doing it today. And it's on page 20 if you have the book. I'll read from it because I know a lot of folks that joined haven't read the book, or maybe they read it a long time ago and they don't remember, that sort of thing. So he's talking about, Dr. Lakoff is talking about Frank Luntz, who is basically the Republican wordsmith, the conservative wordsmith. And he wrote a lot of books telling Republicans what language to use, much like Dr. Lakoff is for us. And this is something that I didn't know until I read this. And it was him who persuaded conservatives to stop talking about, quote, global warming because it sounded too scary and suggested human agency. Instead, he brought, quote, climate change into our public discourse on the grounds that climate sounded kind of nice. Think about palm trees, and change just happens with no human agency. So that is something you can do. Did you know that climate change was a conservative frame? I didn't. Now I do. And I vow going forward that I will never use climate change again. And when people talk about climate change, I will talk about global warming. And tell your friends, tell your climate change and environmentalist friends about this, and tell them, start using global warming again, because we were using it at first and we were winning. In the very next line, by 2003, the scientific consensus was going against conservatives. That's when they started talking about climate change and clean coal and the Clear Skies Act and all these things that he's using this, it is what it isn't language, Orwellian language. And global warming kind of drifted out of the common parlance. So let's bring it back. How about we do that for the next 2 weeks? Just when you're talking about climate change, instead of talking about climate change, talk about global warming, because that's what it is. And that is our framing. And that gives a sense of urgency. So that's just one really small example that he brought up in the book that I was thinking about. There's a bunch in part 3 and part 4, which is next time. And we will have a special guest next time. Hopefully, we have a tentative yes. And for our next guest, I won't reveal who that is until I'm 100% sure, but it is someone of a similar status as Qasim is. So, Wes?
Thank you all so much. And we'll send a form out via email, and hopefully everyone gets it. Please provide feedback for us. This was our first time with such a large audience, so we want to know how we can make your experience better. And do just know in that email will be the sign up for week 2 if you haven't signed up. And so you can sign up for that, and just know we'll be starting at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time on Monday, June 1st. And that will be how we'll start again on June 8th for our last discussion. So thank you guys so much. We appreciate it. We're 7 minutes over time, so we want to honor that. And thank you guys so much. And check us out, Building Bridges, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We would like to continue the conversation to bring the reframing to our progressive party at the grassroots level. So thank you all so much. Have a great night.
Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it.